What is going on, guys? It is your boy here, the combat consultant, of course, the soundboard god, Jacob Cooperman, and I want to respond to a video that was recently released by KSI. Seems like kind of a ritual on his channel where he's trashing Jake for his choice to go ahead and fight Nate Diaz in boxing in August. Now, I wanted to respond to this video because some of the things that KSI says, I very much so agree with. Others, I could not disagree with more. But I also want to talk about why I think that fighting Nate Diaz for Jake is a lot better of an option than a lot of people are giving Paul credit for. So let's get into it.
Yes, Jake Paul is fighting Nate Diaz this August. Nate Diaz, a man that has had most of his fights at lightweight, so that's about 155 pounds. I mean, I guess he's had some fights at welterweight, which is about 170 pounds. But with a record of 3 wins and 3 losses at welterweight, it's not great. Now keep in mind, in August, Jake Paul is going to be fighting Nate Diaz 185 pounds. Nate has never fought at 185 pounds.
So you'll see the first thing, and I just played it on screen for you. The first thing that KSI brings up is the weight discrepancy. The fact that Nate Diaz has never competed at 185 pounds. In fact, he's significantly smaller. And that, in fact, the biggest weight class that Diaz has competed at is welterweight, which is 170 pounds. That's 15 pounds lighter. And he says this like it's supposed to be some sort of a detractor from Jake's part of the fight, where it says, okay, well, Jake is just making this the most favorable matchup possible, this, that, the third. And while I will admit that Jake Paul has done that in past matchups, right? It's very well documented that Jake has had rehydration clauses, has picked guys that are a little bit more slow, a little bit less mobile. This isn't one of those situations, and I'll tell you why. Right before UFC 202, when Nate Diaz was set to face Conor McGregor, there was a headline that came out, an article stating that he was a ludicrous, before that fight, and I want you guys to take this in with me, a ludicrous 200 pounds. I don't think KSI quite understands the dynamics of how weigh-ins work and guys with their natural weight. It's not uncommon for athletes to cut a ton of weight, especially a guy like, let's just say, a Makhachev, that his natural walk-around weight is 180 and he cuts all the way down to 155 to give him that huge competitive advantage that allows him to kind of suffocate guys. So Nate Diaz, especially considering that this is an influencer boxing match, I don't think that competing at 180 pounds would necessarily be a problem for Nate. And then you could argue maybe there's a big height difference between the two of them, right? To where maybe Nate's at lightweight because he's a little bit shorter and he just can't really pack on too much onto that frame without becoming out of shape or having it hinder his athletic performance. But that's not true either, because Nate Diaz stands at a square 6 feet. Jake, as it's listed on Google, is 6'1". So the more you start to look into this, the less it makes sense that there is seemingly this like uneven playing field for Jake in terms of weight and competitiveness. I mean, he's fought Tyron Woodley before. Tyron Woodley competed at welterweight in the UFC. Now, Nate Diaz is no Tyron Woodley with the amount of muscle that Tyron has on his frame at all times, but I don't think that making that weight should be that much of an issue as KSI is presenting it for Diaz.
Now, let's be real. Nate Diaz isn't really known for his striking. Even in 4-ounce gloves, rarely knocks anyone out cold. In fact, most of his wins are via submission. You know why? Because that's what he's good at. He has a black belt in jiu-jitsu. 12 of his 21 wins in MMA is via submission. That's over half. That's not a coincidence. That's just because he's very good at jiu-jitsu. You know what he's not very good at? Boxing. Nate Diaz is a 37-year-old black belt jiu-jitsu MMA fighter that happens to throw a punch every now and then. And for me, ladies and gentlemen, that is the problem with Jake Paul.
I really want to give KSI the benefit of the doubt sometimes. I think, again, what he's done for the scene is awesome and nothing should be taken away from that. But that take's just fucking garbage, man. That take is so garbage. Of course he's going to be a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He's competed at the upper echelon of the UFC for so many years now. And to sit here and say that his boxing is not up to par when he went toe-to-toe with McGregor and when he's been in there with Leon Edwards, Anthony Pettis. You look at some of these wins. I have them up on the phone here. Michael Johnson. He went up against Rafael Dos Anjos, Gray Maynard. I mean, come on, man. You don't subsist in that upper level, that upper echelon of the UFC and have those wins if your boxing is not top tier. Does it look pretty? Absolutely not. But Nate Diaz can box. Let's stop that. Let's stop acting like he hasn't trained with boxing champions before. The amount of disrespect, and I feel like at this point, the blatant kind of narrative that KSI is creating here, when he could easily just look up a Nate Diaz highlight clip. Also, just a little aside, I love how when KSI says he'll throw a punch every once in a while, the highlight he shows is Diaz dropping in a beautiful cross and dropping his opponent.
He can't beat boxers. That's why he's staying clear from me, Salt Papi, Joe Fournier, etc. Because he knows ultimately he's not that good. Now, chances are Jake Paul will beat Nate Diaz, either through decision or via knockout or technical knockout. And that's mainly because Nate Diaz won't be able to use his ultimate weapon, his best weapon, jiu-jitsu. Instead, he's going to have to rely on his subpar boxing ability against Jake Paul, who, let me remind you, only does boxing. And this is the same bullshit that we're gonna get with the whole Ben Askren situation.
So this is the other thing that KSI goes on to assert in the video, and that's that Jake Paul is scared to fight an actual boxer, right? Because he got slapped around by Tommy Fury. KSI then goes on to give examples of real boxers like Salt Papi or Joe Fournier, the guy that KSI is about to fight. When we have concrete proof that Fournier has sped up footage and his training partners have faked drops. KSI, Jake has fought one more real boxer than you have. So what are we talking about here? You're fighting Joe Fournier. You're fighting, if a smokescreen was a person in boxing, a sham, a charlatan, that's who you're fighting. Let's stop this right now, man. I mean, I got so much respect for KSI. I think he's super duper talented, but let's not do this right now. Like, you're gonna say that Fournier and Salt Papi are actual boxers. Salt Papi, wildly talented. I'm never gonna take that away from him. But if we're talking about real actual boxers, we're talking about the guys who are actually sanctioned. But that's the last of that video that I want to react to before I get really, really upset, because a lot of the stuff in that video is just patently false, and we know this to be the case. I don't know if KSI just really hasn't watched that much UFC. He hasn't done his homework on Nate, but anyone that watches Nate for more than a couple of seconds can tell you that that man can strike. Now, as for how I think that this affects Jake's legacy, I do think it is, on the surface, a step back, right? Because he did get beat by an actual boxer in Tommy Fury, a boxer that looked good and has been doing it for a while, has specialized in boxing, like KSI said. But part of me also doesn't mind seeing Jake go back to the drawing board a little bit and get a test in Nate Diaz, a unique test that I don't think we've seen him have before. I think a lot of people have so much vitriol for Jake that they're viewing this through a lens of negativity, right? They're saying, oh yeah, well, he just is running back to an easier test, an easier challenge with his tail tucked between his legs because he was bested by another guy. I just don't think that's the case. I'm going to put my detective cap on, and I'm going to venture to take a guess that this has something to do with Jake Paul competing in MMA. Don't be surprised if he parlays this into something in that realm or that region or that community. A lot of people create narratives with their emotions, right? They lead with their emotions instead of thinking critically. I don't know. I think Jake's cooking something up, man, and I can't ignore it. And purely from an entertainment standpoint, the lead up to this fight should be absolutely hilarious. The fight itself really interests me. It's a fight that a lot of people that I work with personally have been calling for a while. So a lot of people want to see this, man, and I don't see the shame in Jake after that Tommy fight, a fight that I didn't know if it was necessarily that marketable, going back and making a big money fight of this magnitude. But without further ado, guys, that has been the episode. Thank you so much for watching. It has been your boy, the Soundboard God, the Combat Consultant, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.